riding down Highway 61. Sides of the roads all lined with fields, nothing but sunset in the windshield. Feel it as soon as I ride into town. This is where I go to slow down. Miles and miles of soybeans and corn. I'm in the place where the blues was born. About a mile from the big muddy river, place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel my worries drift away from being out in the sun all day. No matter where in the world I go, I'll always find home on the banks of that oxbow.
What's up, guys? Justin Berry here at the Crappie Connection. Got my partners right beside all the time.
Brad Chappell here.
And we have a special guest for, I think everybody's going to tune in and kind of have fun with it. I know I'm going to have fun with it.
This is one that we have been waiting to get.
It was like one of our second ideas for a guest to come on, and it's took about a year and a half for us to kind of capture one here. But we have...
They're hard to catch.
They are, ain't they? We have Josh Johnston, the Northwest Regional Supervisor...
Northeast.
Gosh. Northeast Regional Supervisor of Fisheries in Oklahoma here, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, Josh,
Appreciate your time.
appreciate your time coming
No,
up.
thanks for having me.
For sure. So we're going to have all kinds of questions, personal stance. A lot of guys around here will walk around. I've asked some questions that they want to know straight from biologists to get the number one source corrected. First, let's give a description about yourself. How long, when did you start? What made you kick it off?
Yeah, so I've been working for the Department of Wildlife in Oklahoma in fisheries for about 16 years now. And it all started when I was a little kid, like everybody else that does this probably. Fishing, hunting, loved it. And so I always thought I wanted to do something like this. Every little kid, I think, wants to be like a fireman or a zookeeper or something.
Right.
It's always animals or firemen. And so I went the animal route, and then I just kept, I didn't change my mind over time. And went to school, got a bachelor's degree from Oklahoma State University in fish and wildlife biology. And then I went back and got my master's degree later on in life from OSU again, Northeast, our Natural Resources, Ecology, and Management. And so here I am. I'm supervising the northeast quarter of the state and managing the fish populations in all those lakes and rivers around there.
I got one real quick question about Oklahoma that's always made me scratch my head.
Let's hear it.
You probably already know it's about to come. 37. How did that actually number come out?
37.
Here's the deal. 37 a day is our statewide regulation on crappie. There's some differences across the state. But for the most part, when you come to Oklahoma and you're crappie fishing, you can keep 37 a day. And
That's a strange number.
It
is, ain't it?
It is, and I'm going to butcher it. But I'm going to tell you the truth of what I've heard, and this is like all day I'm going to give you the real facts. But right now I don't know that there are facts. So I've heard a few different things. One, that Kansas had a limit of 25 and Texas had a limit of 50. So 37 and a half is the middle, but you can't have a half a fish, so there's 37. Another one was in the 50s, a game warden said, hey, these guys that you follow are keeping way too many crappie. We need to do something about that. And this other game warden said, what's the number that you need? And he said, I don't know, but a 5-gallon bucket of crappie will feed any family. So they counted how many were in a 5-gallon bucket. It was 37. I don't know that either one of those are true, but here's the fact behind it. What the key to good crappie management is harvest.
Right.
And so in almost no situation, you unless you had commercial fishing, you're not going to set the harvest high enough to affect that population. And that's shown in 37. Almost you don't run into that many people outside of guides that are cleaning 37 crappie a day. Even if you could, you don't want to.
Right.
Even if it's that day, you're going to be like, I don't want to clean that many. So it's a number that we go in and we in a situation where we have an over harvest or we have bad recruitment or some situation, we might lower that number. But outside of that number's just sitting there because it's a high number, and harvest is the key to keeping those populations.
It's a good middle
check.
number, huh?
Yeah. That's pretty crazy. So you got to use fishing outdoors and doing all that before you decide to go in that direction, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Gosh, the number one, I'm just going to dive right in with the questions. The number one sought out crazy question that I think that you just need to squash it with everybody that's listening to all 48 states. How many times a year does a crappie spawn? I've heard of super spawns twice a year. Lay it all out for us because I want to have some fun, right? Just break the ice with it.
Here's the deal. Crappie spawn, if we just talk about 99%, the 99 percentile, crappie spawn once a year.
Right.
Is that at, 58 degrees or 68 degrees? We could start arguing because there's going to be some on the outside and some on the other side, some late ones, some early ones. But like everything else biologically, most of them are going to have a peak time, and it's going to be, 63, 64, somewhere in there degrees. And that peak time also kind of meshes with the length of day. So you have these length of day that lines up. It's like in Oklahoma, it seems like first week or two of April is going to be good, no matter what.
Is that just a water temperature thing? Or?
It's not just a water temperature thing, because some of those years we have water temperatures, and I hear a lot of guys make some mistakes. It's not a full-on mistake. They're in pre-spawn. They're doing some pre-spawn type stuff, but some guys will say, well, a year like this, let's say we go into a really warm February and we keep our water temperatures really high, and they're like at 59, 61 degrees, and February the 14th. That's happened. About 2008, we had our peach trees, already had peach blooms all over. And people are like, well, the crappie must be spawning. Well, they weren't. It's not, everything has to come together right. So you have this length of day thing, the time of light, diel period is what it's called, but it's how much light is in a day. That meshes with water temperature and a bunch of other factors that come out and make things work. Now everything's going to have a peak for one main reason. Safety is in numbers, right?
Right.
And so if everybody just decides to spawn willy-nilly, there's a lot less numbers there to make sure your kids have a chance at getting in the middle of that ball and making it to the end. So it's biologically and evolutionarily good for those things to have a peak. So I would say the peak is right there at like 64, 60, somewhere in there, and somewhere in the 1st of April at this latitude, 1st April through the middle of April. But now, do they spawn twice? I'm not going to say that there's never been a crappie that hasn't spawned when that length of day and that water temperature is kind of almost perfect again in the fall.
But there is no fall super spawns you ever heard of, right?
No.
Okay.
No.
We just want to set the record straight on that.
And we pull otoliths, so that's the inner ear bone on fish, on crappie to do age and growth studies. And we do that more on crappie across the nation than we do on any other fish. One, because there's a lot of them, and two, because it's more important for management to see how those crappie are growing than it is to see an abundance, right? So we're more into how are these things growing than looking at the abundance, because they're so sporadic in spawning anyway. You're going to have high years and low years. And that being said, we would be able to pick out, oh, hey, look at this one. This is fall spawn and this is spring spawn. That doesn't happen very often. I mean, you see a few of them that's like, why is this one 3 inches? But that's like 1 in a million.
Right.
Most of them are.
What about life expectancy of fish? Even, mortality rate after a spawn. What's the percentage of fish that actually die just from the spawn process on average?
So you're talking adult fish?
Yeah.
I guess it depends on the lakes, right?
Yeah, it depends
where they
on
grow.
the lake. It depends on the stress. It depends on what's going on. I mean, I can break it down pretty easy for you. A typical crappie is going to live 4 to 5 years. But you can't take that to the bank. I've pulled otoliths on crappie that were 12 years old. And that's
Really?
not
You pulled what now?
The ear bone.
otolith, the inner ear bone, the piece of bony structure that has rings on it. And that's how we get the age of crappie.
So how many
We do
rings
our
per
age
year?
growth. 1.
Oh,
like a tree.
so pretty
Yeah.
simple.
Yeah, it's pretty simple, and it's not simple on a lot of fish, but with crappie, it is a really fail-safe way. They have a pretty good-sized otolith that's not real calcified. They grow fast already, so it's like the rings are kind of far apart, and it's easy to read them.
So can any individual can cut it out and look at it?
Yeah, I mean, you might have to have somebody show you how to cut it out and then show you one time in a microscope. Is
That's how you read it, microscope.
Yeah, but it's not like your old school microscope. It's a dissecting scope, so it's just like 3 and 4 times. It's not like 400 times.
Really?
You won't see anything. It's pretty easy. You can hold the big one up to that light right there, and we could.
Well, I learned something right there. I didn't know that.
So, yeah, you pull these otoliths, and I've seen them up to 12 years old.
Wow. How big was that 12-year-old one?
That's a funny thing. The 12-year-old fish was 6 inches.
6 inches.
Really?
6 inches in a stunted population. Back to why harvest is very, very important. Everybody sees these small crappie, especially in our lakes that are so stunted, and the writing's on the wall. Like some of these lakes you can go to and go to the little crappie dock, and they're catching one every catch. Put on 2 jigs, you catch one. You catch 2, and they'll say, well, these things need time to grow. We need to let these grow. There's people keeping some of them. I can't believe this. And it's like, you need to keep way more of them because your fish are ranging from 1 to 9 years old, and they're all 6 inches long.
Would you, as a department at that point, say, well, you know what, this lake's getting really overpopulated. Let's take off all the limits on it and encourage harvest?
Yeah. Once again, 37 is pretty liberal. We could take that limit off, but you're probably not going to get people to follow it. The best thing that I've found to do, and it's worked in a couple times in small impoundments, and this is where this usually happens, small impoundments anyway. But you go to the town and you try to get the city council to let you get on the board one night, and it's education.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I know you hate the way these guys are doing it, and I know you guys hate the way these guys are doing it, but here's what you guys ought to do, and you work towards this. So for you guys that don't want to keep 6-inch fish, plant them under your corn. For you guys that want to keep 6-inch fish, please keep more, and that's going to help everybody. It worked at Claremore City Lake pretty well. We had a bad stunted population at a lake that's been there for 80 years. Nobody ever remembered it being that great. And we talked to them, had them change some limits, had them do some different stuff, and then educated the public. And now the last couple years of our sampling over there, we've seen some fish that we never saw there. 4-year-old fish that are 12 and 13 inches. So that's pretty good.
In Oklahoma, and the latitude goes across everywhere, but a 2-pound fish, what would be the average age of that fish?
2 to 3 pound.
In a
2 pound.
In a healthy population in Oklahoma, a 2-pound crappie is going to be what, 15 inches?
Right, yeah.
Take a guess.
Yeah.
I'd say in a really healthy population, Fort Gibson, Grand Lake, Eufaula, Oologah. One of those, you're looking at 3 to 4 years. 3 to 4 years.
Pretty fast, then.
Yeah, it is fast, and they grow fast, but they also, it's a potential type thing. And I've had this talk with a lot of guys that are now, into trophy crappie fishing. I like to see that this crappie fishing is really evolving. I think most people are still fishing for them to eat, but there's a group of people that are fishing for them for the trophy aspect, and they want to know, how do we get more of these fish that are this big? And what you have to understand is it's kind of like a northern strain largemouth bass. There's a potential. There's a limited potential there. And so
genetics.
Well, it's not just genetics, but genetic, but there's no other genetic variation of crappie. So when we talk about it, well, why are they 18 pounds in Florida? Well, they're Florida strain largemouth bass. We don't have a Florida strain crappie. So what we do have, though, is they grow super fast, but they have a potential limit. And I really think, and from what I've read in the literature, the potential for most crappie is about 2 pounds. I mean, when people ask, how do we grow 3-pound crappie? Well, the answer is really kind of like good luck when it comes to management. Give them all the shad they can eat, and good habitat. But outside of that, it's up to them, and their genetics and their potential.
Just let nature take its course, pretty much.
Yeah, basically, I mean, how long is it going to take for you to get 7 feet tall?
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But there are humans that have the potential to do that. So I think when you do catch that weird 4 and 4.5 pound crappie, that's not something that you're like, man, I want to manage for this. How do we do this? You could pull some genetics off that fish and maybe go down that line to figure out how to make this, monster garage fish. But It's certainly not a normal thing.
Since we're talking about the 2 or 3 pounds and try to manage it to have the bigger fish, somebody was telling me that you might have said it, or somebody, when you catch a big fish like that, as anglers listening in, does it help if you throw that fish back, or is it at the end of its life?
It's kind of in the air there. So does it help? There's probably, when you catch a really big fish, there's probably some genetic potential there that most other crappie don't have, right? Because you're fishing in this population of fish, and that's not a normal fish, even in, let's say you're at Millwood or something, right? You catch a 4-pounder. That's not a normal fish there. So there's two sides to this. One, yes, it's probably towards the end of its life. It's probably not contributing much to the population. However, those genetics are different, so I would say I would feel bad. I wouldn't feel bad either way.
You wouldn't feel bad either way.
Mount it, eat it, whatever. I'd probably eat it. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm just being honest. But as an angler that thinks I might be doing something good, you're certainly not hurting anything. Where I go a different direction on that is with these new crappie tournaments and everything. A lot of them are saying we're going to mandate catch and release,
right?
Which is fine, but it's just like bass fishing at this point. When you get to a certain part of the year and that water temperature's up in the 80, 85 degrees, I would say that's futile. Those fish aren't dying immediately, and that's what people see. They say, well, I threw the bass back and it swam off. But, you know, when we studied this in bass, it's like above 85-degree water temperature, it's like 98 or 99% mortality on all those fish. That's like almost every single one of them. And you think, well, where do they all go?
That's what the guy behind was saying. He was saying that y'all did like a bass study. Out of all the bass that was caught, like 90% y'all found and tracked that was dead.
Yeah,
correct?
It wasn't me personally, but Gene Gilliland, a past biologist here with the Department of Wildlife in Oklahoma. He also was our assistant chief. He's now conservation conservation director at BASS. Him and Hal Schramm, a guy from Mississippi, they did all these studies. And yeah, once that water temperature gets really high, even though you're not noticing it, and no matter how good your stuff is that you're using, those fish are so stressed that when they get dropped back in the water, they can't overcome that stress. And you're taking them out of a live well that's, let's say it's you've got it iced and it's perfect at 68 degrees, but at some point you've got to turn them back into water that's 85, 90 degrees, and they're so stressed and they just don't come out of that, and they're apt to get disease. So all the way to 6 weeks out, they're still dying.
6 weeks out.
Most of it's delayed. So most of it we don't see, and we think, oh, it wasn't that bad. There was like 8 fish dead, but most of it's delayed.
I guess I'm seeing a lot of things on social media right now with the guys. You know, they're catching let's say 6 2-pounders, and they're putting them in their boat, and at the end of the day, they're actually going back and taking a bunch of pictures with them, and then they're showing them releasing. Is that kind of even in the wintertime, you say most likely these fish probably not going to survive at that point? Would they be better off going ahead and catching it right then if they're going to turn it loose and dropping it back in the lake? Yeah,
at all times. If you're going to turn a fish loose, if you have any thought of catch and release, every second you handle it more is worse for it.
Right.
It makes the chances worse. We've looked at it with some fish like paddlefish. They're the toughest fish on earth, though, and it seemed like you had to do some pretty rough things to them. But then you start looking at it with trout. If those trout, touch your hand or something, they don't make it. So anyway, it is a crazy deal with the catch and release and what works and what doesn't. But just use best management practices. If you're going to catch and release these fish, take care of them as well as you can, and handle them as little as possible, and keep them in water as often as possible.
What about like even holding fish? If you're going to catch one and you intend on releasing that fish, I know a lot of people hold it by the jaw and torque it out. How much would that actually damage that crappie in your mind? The
weight of a crappie, I don't know. I don't know these studies well enough to tell you exactly on a crappie. They've done it with largemouth bass, and once that largemouth bass gets out to like 5 pounds, you shouldn't be cranking it back.
Right.
It's like hold it straight down, and then once it's up in the 8-9 pound range, they really want you to barely hold the lip here and support the body of it. And it's just, with crappie, it's going to be the same. Their jaws are so much softer. You guys know that. You get a huge 3-pounder on a jig, and you can really cause some trouble with it just pulling against it. So anytime you're pulling that back like that, you can break that jaw. And if you break those hinges in their jaw, it's going to be hard for them to eat. It's going to stress them out, obviously. Some fish somehow live through some really crazy things, and then some don't make it through
You know, the reason I'm saying this is these guys catch these giant slabs.
Yeah.
You know, and they want to put them back for the genetics. They need to make sure that they're
Yeah,
holding it in the right way.
Yeah, support them, or at least hold them to where you're just holding the lip and it's extending straight down. You're not pulling back to get that fish to set horizontally. If you're going to do that, yeah, support it.
That's a good point. Somebody was explaining to me filter feed on a crappie or on fish. Period. Have you ever heard of that?
Go into a little more detail.
I guess more like plankton. Like, do they feed through their gills?
No. Not crappie. Now, paddlefish, if you guys know paddlefish, they're down here. They've got gill rakers in their gills, so it's like a big bunch of combs, right? Just like a blue whale or something. And they swim through and open their mouth. Whale, shark, same way, open their mouth, and all that stuff comes in, and they filter out the plankton. If it's in the ocean, it's krill, but it's zooplankton and things like that. Crappie do not eat like that, no. Any of our centrarchid family, which is going to be your sunfish, it's like bluegill, crappie, largemouth bat, all of those fish are piscivores, so they eat other fish. They spend a very short time in their life cycle eating zooplankton, starting out on little bitty plankton, moving to a little bit bigger plankton, and then that's another reason why everything spawns in the spring, because if you had a crappie that spawns in the fall, think about this. Let's go back to that question.
Yeah, super spawn.
Let's say we have the crappie spawning in the fall. How are they going to make it through the winter? Right. What are they eating?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of plankton in the water to get them even to the piscivore stage. And then when they get there, the baby bluegill now are, 2 or 3 inches long. So that's another reason why fall spawns probably happen every now and then, because it's the time of day, the length of day, and the temperature line up. But those cues that are in their body, like a deer or anything else, those genetic cues aren't correct. Now, if a female gets those genetic cues, and let's say they're wrong, or it's something weird, or she just gets those, I guarantee there's plenty of males that are going to take her up on the offer, right? It's just like anything else in biology. But for that female to get that cue, that's not going to be normal. There's not going to be a normal super spawn, because you're not getting those super spawns in most of your bait fish.
I got you. For the spawn, keep talking about the spawn here. What size when they hatch, what's the size and a year later on average of a crappie?
Yeah, really.
Like if I catch one in the fall and it's small, how could you determine if it was hatched that year?
Best way to determine is cut its head open, get an otolith, and get an age, because everybody always thinks a little fish is a small fish. But let me just go through the numbers. What I like to see is in my healthy lakes, we've got a 10-inch minimum limit on some of these lakes that have quick flow through. That's because they come up and they go down so often with the Corps of Engineers or the or GRDA running water through it, and we miss year classes of fish because they get left high and dry or they get flooded out. And so we have a 10-inch minimum length limit and 15 a day on those lakes. The reason for 10 inches is because we have decided that a normal, healthy, sexually mature fish is about 10 inches long, 9.5 inches. And so that being said, we get them to the chance, let's give them a chance to spawn before they can get pulled out. That's the idea behind it. So 10 inches on a good, healthy lake is 2 years, a 2-year-old fish. But it's not uncommon to see an 8.5, 9-inch fish that's a year old either. So when you catch a fish in the fall, 6 or 7 inches would be because he's had all that growing time, 6 inches or so, is going to be a normal born in the spring.
6-month-old or what have you.
Yeah. They're not going to grow much over the winter, and then they're going to hit that, they're going to get to the fall. If you're late in the fall, it ought to be about 7 inches, because they're not going to grow much over the winter.
Right. I got you. Speaking of the flooding, or you talked about some flood waters, I think, just a while ago, how does how does floodwaters affect the spawn?
Well, it just kind of depends. If you're in one of these lakes where they have the opportunity to get floodwaters out really quick, or hold them for a long period of time, it can be good and bad. The Corps of Engineers is generally trying to get it out as quick as they can because they're trying to stop massive floods from happening, and that usually hurts. So you've got this flood that comes in, it floods all this great new habitat, and these fish are, let's say they're ready to go, and water temperature's right, it's the right time of year, everything's happening. They go up there and they start spawning, and the water's dropping way too fast. But it might be also a good time to mention another thing that's pretty surprising on crappie. The average depth of spawning on a crappie, where would you guys guess?
Well, just from go ahead, Brad.
What I believe in that, I think some lakes have a different personality when it comes to the spawning depths. Like Barnett, I've caught fish 10, 12 foot deep spawning. And then, you got some lakes you're looking at 2 to 3, 2 to 4, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah. So clarity and turbidity, they make a huge difference in where a fish is going to spawn depth-wise. But just apples to apples, let's just say everything's the same and take an average about 14 feet.
Average 14
Average,
feet?
about 14 feet, 10 to 14 feet. And that's crazy. I'm not going to do it. I'm not a good enough crappie fisherman to go, if I'm fishing in the spring, I know where I'm going to be.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a difference in age class on where they spawn in depth-wise?
Ooh, good question.
I haven't done that study, but that's kind of where I was going with this, that some of your bigger fish, especially in largemouth bass, we see our bigger fish spawning in deeper water. And I wonder if that's just a little bit older, know the ropes a little bit better, they realize they're putting a lot of effort into raising these eggs and doing this thing, and so they, like the oak tree, it puts its leaves on last, right? Because it's not going to lose them like our peach trees are wanting to bloom in February sometimes. So I don't know if that's if it's a different year class or what, but you definitely do have these preferential areas. Like these fish spawn deeper, these fish spawn shallower. If you're in a really clear lake, obviously it's a little bit deeper, but in turbid lakes even, you've got them from 6 inches down to 9 feet. So hopefully that's just an evolutionary thing that they're supposed to spread out, and some of them get different genetics to tell them to do different things for reasons of, like that flood. When they start dropping that water, that guy that's in that beautiful, perfect button bush that's like a foot deep now, the Corps of Engineers can drop 2 feet in a day. I mean, and they're in trouble at that point. So the floodwaters have mixed effects. If they stay up long enough, if they're somewhat stable enough for them to get a spawn off, then I think it's great, because the nursery habitat there for the babies, for the fry, and the food availability from all those new nutrients that are now just like making phytoplankton go crazy, which then in turn makes the zooplankton go gangbusters. These things are growing. They got all the groceries they need. They've got habitat. They've got places to hide. Everything they need. So it's just kind of a double-edged sword. Like, you need these floods. You need that nutrients. You need that new habitat. But when they come down really fast, you could also have a pretty big debacle.
Man, that's very thorough. Very thorough. Very thorough.
I got another question for you. When black crappie and white crappie spawn together, and it becomes a black-nosed crappie?
No.
Are they sterile, or do they become a white or black? Or
Okay, let's go back to that. So the black-nosed crappie are also called the magnolia crappie, and it is a black crappie, and it's just I don't know if you guys have ever seen, like, taking your kids to a trout pond or something where they stock trout from a hatchery, and you'll see these golden trout.
I never caught a trout.
It's a morphology.
what's a trout?
Yeah, what is that?
Yeah.
Hold on.
So
What is a trout?
these golden trout are a morphological stage or phase of the rainbow trout, and it's like, it's not as much as, say, being an albino in some things. It's like 1 in 10,000 can be this, and that's kind of what's going on with the black-nosed crappie or the magnolia crappie. That's just a weird phase. Like you've seen things that have melanism. They're black instead of the regular color of the animal, or albinism. Those things are less prominent than, say, the golden trout. And then, but those genetics are in those populations. So once you've caught a magnolia crappie, then you've got more of a likelihood. Like 10 Killer Lake, Oklahoma, it's pretty easy to catch those things. If you're catching black crappie, you're probably going to catch one that's a black nose, and it's because those genetics are higher in that population. They're actually spawning and moving, but it's not a hybrid fish.
It's just like a trait then.
Yes, it's just a weird genetic trait, but it's not like albinism that gets you attacked easier. It's got its little black line down your nose. You're probably more likely to have any issues with predators or anything like that, so it stays in the population. But I have heard of gray crappie. People calling them gray crappie.
Gray crappie.
That's the.
Never know gray. Have you heard of gray crappie?
But
Never know gray crappie.
That's what a lot of these guys are calling the hybrid between the white
That's
and
my
the
next
black.
question right
gray
there.
Crappie.
So do the black crappie ever spawn with a white crappie?
Naturally,
Naturally.
I would say ever, yeah, of course, but very often, probably not. There's reasons why you don't see natural hybridization very often in nature, because it's really futile, right? If you're working for your species, then this is not a really good idea. But then you start getting into these fish that are a little different, close spawners, like community spawners, say sunfish. You could hybridize sunfish like crazy, because the red ear, the bluegill, the long ear, they're all just hanging out, and their nests are all in the good habitat. They're close to each other, and it's a basic orgy. But then you
exactly
get
what I was thinking, man.
Yeah, you get into the largemouth bass or something, and they're like, no, my nest is here, so you can build one, but it needs to be 10 to 12 feet away, or I'm going to destroy yours every time you try, you know? And so black and white crappie are a little different. I don't think they're out there like plotting against each other and destroying each other and making sure they're this far apart. But if you'll notice something about black and white crappie, if you're in the same reservoir, or if you're in a reservoir that holds both of them, then those black crappie are most typically, I can tell you places that this is not true, but most typically they seek out that clear water, like your smallmouth bass. Like if you've got smallmouth bass and largemouth bass, and then you can probably go to your smallmouth bass habitat and find more black crappie than whites,
Correct.
and go to your largemouth bass habitat and find more whites than black. And it's a turbidity issue, it's a little bit of a habitat issue, and it's basically that genetic thing that keeps these fish from hybridizing purposely.
I know, like, so let's say black crappie. What's the average spawning temperature for black crappie
Versus white crappie?
versus white crappie? Is there a difference?
I would say there's not.
Really?
I would say there's not, but I would say that it probably in your mind there's probably a little difference, because most of the places you're finding these black crappie it's clear water, and it takes longer. And so your white crappie, you think in your mind like, well, the white crappie are probably spawning, and then a week or two later you're like, the black crappie are probably.
I've always thought the opposite. That black
I did too. Black crappie spawn first in colder temperatures versus the white crappie.
And that might be true. I might need to look into it, but I haven't noticed that, and I do know that that when you have a turbid lake, though, it's going to heat up a lot faster, and you're catching those fish before you're catching the fish in the clear lakes. And the clear lakes typically hold the black crappie, and the turbid lakes typically hold the white crappie. So that's where I'm going with that. I should probably know if there's a difference in those spawning temperatures, but I don't, because I usually talk in ranges anyway. I'm not the guy that's going to say, 63.5 degrees you need to be there, because that's really not true. There's a range of a lot of things that come together, and that range from
a lot of alignment.
59 to 68 degrees is you ought to be fishing. I mean, that's all I'm going to say.
Is there a typical time frame that, say, 6 weeks or 8 weeks that the actual spawn occurs, or can...
Or like how fast a fish spawns in and out of an area?
You know, I've heard people say, well, they spawned really quick this year because the water heated on up quick.
I think that's more into... I think that goes more into the whole situation with a crappie. They're really not good parents. And so instead of like a lot of other fish, they spend very little energy to make eggs. You've seen their eggs. They're tiny.
Right.
There's 50,000 of them or so. And the mom thinks, her idea is different than, say, a paddlefish, where we're like, we're going to work really hard to make these really healthy big eggs, and then we might just spawn every 3 years when it's really good. The crappie's like, well, I'm going to do it the different way, the shotgun approach. Like, I'm going to make 50,000 eggs, not work too hard at it, go dump them out there 10 years in a row, and at some point, I'm probably going to have some babies make it. And so, that being said, it's a real quick process with crappie. The dad goes up there a little bit, makes a kind of decent nest. Mom shows up, dumps some eggs, swims off. It's a 2-3 day deal. It's probably 72 hours or so to hatch, and then some other time for the fish to swim up. And that sort of stuff. But what's going on in those short windows and big window years, I think, is you get these strung out spawns, as in it gets warm and
Cools off, yeah.
the time frame is about right. You're say one of those years where it's like April 1st and it's warm, and it's been warm for 3 days straight. You get a spawn, and then you get that huge cold front that comes in, and it's like, whoa, man, that just changed everything. And the next time it gets warm, those fish that were just a little bit behind are like, we better go get this done. And that happens. We had that 2 or 3 years ago here in Oklahoma where it literally got warm from March 1st through May the 14th, and May the 14th was the last time I remembered that year having a cold front, like a substantial cold front, 50, 40-degree weather, wind blowing, and so it was just up and down, and people caught fish that were acting like they were spawning throughout that whole time frame. Then you get those years where it's super warm all winter, and you can do this in 2 ways: super warm all winter, but you got to have that right length of day. And once that length of day hits, this happened in, say, 2014 in Oklahoma. It was like 80-degree temperatures by then. Water temperature was what we thought was too high. Bam, they spawned like on April the 5th, and it was like a really quick deal. Well, the crappie spawn was really a waste of time this year, But, I mean, it was great, but it was a short window because everybody spawned at once. Had it the opposite, maybe last year or the year before, where we had it just stayed cold. It was the year before last, stayed cold all the way to almost the 1st of May. And all of our fish spawned at about one time, which is weird. Bass and crappie generally don't spawn at the same time, but it's like our bass spawn, our crappie spawn, all of that was going on in that first week of May.
Let's say if they spawn like that and the water cools back off, 10 degrees. Does that kill the fry, or do they survive just fine as well? Or
I don't think that you have a big issue with the fry dying from that water temperature going down. Your issues with fry are going to be the water level going down and moving them from their habitat where they just are stuck out in the open, or if the water temperature changes substantially enough to kill off any of those plankton blooms. If you start losing your plankton blooms, you're going to lose your fish, because those fish need to eat a lot of that at that time of their life to really be putting on. I mean, they're really changing daily in length and in size.
What you said roughly on average, you say 50,000 eggs? Yeah. I'm gonna just ballpark 50,000.
Yeah, ballpark 50,000.
All right. How many actual crappie come out of that?
Yeah, that's another one of those, like, we could just take a guess, but I don't know that you got to have all the situation got to be right. And let's say
perfect world.
I'm going to take a guess on a perfect situation.
No predators.
Perfect situation. Well, I'm not going to go no predators, but perfect situation. 5% recruit.
5%.
Like 5% of that make it to 1 year of age. I say recruit makes it to that 6-7 inches, but I think that's perfect.
Yeah, that's
like
pretty high.
Really high. I think your typical thing might be like you're hoping for 1 or 2%.
I got you.
Is what I would, just to put a guess on.
What would be the number one factor for as their death rate? What kills them the most? Is it crappie?
What eats them the most is what you're asking?
Yeah.
I don't know. I would say crappie are probably eating their fair share. Bluegill are certainly eating their fair share. It's probably everybody's eating their fair share. I mean, when they're that little, especially really little, you're talking about bluegill or even smaller fish. If you've got golden shiners or something like, weird small fish are eating them. But a largemouth bass and stuff like that, a lot of people think, these hybrid striped bass we have are eating all of our crappie. You'd have to think that, one, crappie and hybrid striped bass are very rarely in the same location. And two, it's not worth it for a hybrid striped bass to be eating a crappie until a crappie's pretty good size. And it's the same with a largemouth bass. He's not swimming around going, look at the crappie fry over there. Let's go try to swim through there. I mean, it'd be like filter feeding at that point.
I got you.
And so I think it's disease. I think it's lack of habitat. I think it's fungus, different little stress things that kill almost all of them. And then they get to a level where predation, they do get predated upon as little bitty by bluegill and things like that, your sunfish. But
we need to get rid of the sunfish.
Yeah.
We can get rid of them.
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, too. I think a lot of people always want to get rid of of what's causing those problems, but really what we've already talked about with crappie, they need to be kept in check. There's years where you think, man, I wish we could have had a better spawn because everything went wrong. The Corps of Engineers ran all the water out or something like that, or a big flood came in. Those kind of years is where you're thinking, man, I wish we could have more. But in a really bumper crop spawning year, you depend on harvest, and you're hoping that there's some other fish out there eating their fair share, because they get hung up. When we talk about stunting, I don't know if people really understand what stunting is. So stunting is not just like you drank too much coffee so you're not growing. Stunting is, if you'll notice, a lake that's stunted, you don't catch a lot of little fish that are different sizes. You catch a lot of fish that are the same size. You can stunt at 9 inches. And it's not typical. It's typical for me to see them stunted from 5 to 7 inches. But they get to a point where the gape of their mouth isn't big enough to eat the stuff that's left, and they've eaten everything else beyond that. So there's tiny stuff that doesn't do anything for them, but everything that fits their mouth, now they're all focusing on, we've got to find stuff that we can eat, and they've eaten all of it, so they can't get past that point. But everything gets to that point because there's a lot of stuff at this level, and there's a lot of stuff at this level, and in those situations, it's usually in ponds, and people will say, well, I don't know why you say I shouldn't stock crappie in my pond. Both state records from the state of Oklahoma are from a pond. There's a reason for that. In stunted populations, we sometimes see our biggest crappie, but it's like 1 or 2 of them. So what happens is these fish are starving. They're starving. And when you're starving and you're a piscivore, that's something that eats a fish, you're willing to do about anything to get something to eat. So a lot of these little crappie hit this month or 2 months old. They're starving. They're 2 inches long, and they start trying to eat each other. Most of them choke. They just give up, or they choke to death. But one of them gets his brother down. And when he does, it's the growth rate at this age of these crappie is just incredible. Like within a week, that fish is now 2 to 3 times longer than his brothers and sisters, and he's got groceries for the rest of his life. It's crappie. He's eating his brothers and sisters. They're always growing. It's
a great breakdown of it.
Yeah, and so you have these matriarch fish that just get ridiculous, like 4.5 pounds in 4:15 or something, are our state record crappie. They're both from ponds, and I would almost guarantee the person that caught them might tell you different, but I would almost guarantee those were from stunted ponds.
Wasn't that one guy that caught a 4 or 5 pound in Tennessee from a pond?
I think that was a hybrid.
Yeah. Speaking of hybrids, do you think hybrids get bigger?
Hybrid crappie?
Yeah. Because we see a lot of hybrid crappie down in like southern Illinois area.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that hybridization, but I will say this. There's almost no hybrid that I do know about that doesn't have what we call hybrid vigor, and that is...
hybrid vigor?
Hybrid vigor. You call it hybrid vigor. Anything that's a hybrid seems to have a faster growth rate. And
well, there you go.
Put it on faster. A lot of the reasoning behind that, and it makes sense in some things, not as much in fish, because fish, even if they're hybrids and they are sterile, they still go through the process. They make eggs. They put energy towards that process. So in other biology, let's say we hybridize if you guys ever saw Napoleon Dynamite, his favorite animal is a liger or something like that. It's a tiger and a lion. So you hybridize those, you're going to have the sterile individual, and that thing's not going to spend a whole lot of time doing reproductive stuff. So where fish stop growing, you see this exponential line, and then you get to the 10, 12 inches on a crappie, and the line goes like this. That's not just its genetic potential. Walleye do the same thing, paddlefish. It's not just its genetic potential. It generally happens right exactly when it hits sexual maturity, because it took all of its resources. Everything it lived for was for growing until that point. And now everything it lives for, almost everything, all of its resources are going towards a spawning event. So they're going to spend the rest of the year putting so much into reproductive time. Paddlefish is a perfect example, just because I brought it up. So paddlefish, our biggest paddlefish that we've found, you would think would be big pregnant females that have a lot of eggs. They haven't been. They've all been old age or middle age, immature males, meaning that they never matured. they never matured and started doing anything reproductively. So they're just a steer, basically.
Right.
They're out there
Right.
eating and eating and eating, and all their resources are going towards
To
growth.
Really?
Yeah. And so hybrids, some of that hybrid vigor can come from something like that.
So you're saying that hybrids pretty much they don't hardly focus on spawning.
They
Is
don't.
what you're saying?
Well, in some species, and that's why I'm all over the board right here, and I apologize for that.
No, you're-
I don't
no, you're good.
understand where the hybrid vigor comes from in fish, because those fish, even the saw guy, they go through the process. You know, they do make the eggs. They do try to do the spawning process, but they're not doing it they're not working as hard at it as something that's actually getting it done. So
I'm focus more on eating more, huh?
yeah. So hybrids typically do grow bigger. Our biggest bass in the United States typically are a hybrid between a northern and a Florida strain bass. Not just, they're starting to look into these. There's some studies out there. They're starting to look into it, finding out, well, the biggest ones aren't usually Florida strain. The giant world records are generally this hybrid between the two.
I'll be darned. Man, what else we got here?
What do you got on the table, Justin?
Huh?
What do you have on the table?
Got some Jenko fishing baits. You say you ordered some umbrella rigs the other day, didn't you?
Yeah, I like the Jenko umbrella rigs.
Yeah.
I do some bass fishing.
Do you?
And yeah.
Speaking of Jenko, let's go ahead and talk to him about it a little bit. Jenko Fishing, founded by Colton Jennings as he was growing up, I believe. Started making his own baits, and it grew into bass fishing, now crappie fishing. They're both in the crappie and bass world, ladies and gentlemen. The bass, man, they got creature weights, crankbaits, hair jigs, jerk baits, spoons, swim bait heads, swim baits, top water, umbrella rigs, offspring, buzz baits, and spy baits. He got Tony Shepard behind them, and then they started a crappie line. Good buddy of ours there.
Big
Man, they got everything over there. They got spy baits, crankbaits, jig heads, jigs. They're also making landing nets, minnow dippers, minnow rigs, planer boards, rods, swivels, and apparel. They got it all, man. They're out of Murray, Kentucky. If y'all want to check them out, Jenko Fishing. They're out of Murray, Kentucky. You can email them at info@jenkofishing.com. Check them out. They have all kinds of great stuff: plastics, tackle, rods, a full 9 yards. So be sure and check them out. I want to give them a big thanks and holler to them. Now, you said, that made me think about the umbrella jig that you ordered. You said you've been tournament fishing for how many years now? 3 years?
Pretty seriously, I'm back into it about 3 years, yeah.
3 years. Now, since you've been a biologist, does that give you a little bit more edge to stuff?
Man, I wish. That's the thing. I can tell you, you got questions about how fish work, what they do, where they should be, what they're eating. I can tell you, but getting to the point of catching those fish is a whole different story. And there's some people out there. I mean, I've been on the boat with some guys that are big time, and you just watch how they do things, and they're not biologists. And they'll ask you, why would the fish be here? Why would they be doing this? And it just amazes me that I could tell them, I guess, why, but I can't catch those fish always. So there's a huge disconnect when it comes from where the fish are, what they're doing, and everything, to actually putting them in the boat and catching them. And some people have that knack. It's just amazing for me to watch at some point.
All right, I guess my questions I've been waiting on, and the biggest thing that's happened in 2019, and it's rolling on into 2020 here, is live scope.
Yeah.
It has increased harvest catch ratio, hands over fist. I know. Has the department recognized that that's coming?
We've certainly gotten a lot of phone calls. I talk to a lot of guys on a weekly basis that are worried about it, happy about it, think we need to change regulations. And it is making things easier, but everything over the years, it's just a new thing. Mm-hmm. Everything's made things easier. Right. The foot-controlled trolling motor probably helped more than anything. Right. We can go back and we can always say. So this is my stance on that, and you might want to ask another question, but my stance is that a dead fish is a dead fish. Mm-hmm. And so if you're going to catch that with your hand, noodling a catfish, or with a rod and reel, or with a jug line, me as a biologist, my agency, or the agency in Mississippi or in Missouri, mm-hmm. need to have the wherewithal and should have the wherewithal and are managing based on populations and angler trends. And so we set that limit for a reason, and we can change that limit. We don't ever want to step in, I don't think. This is my thought anyway, and stop something that's happening in the industry that's making things better for the sport.
Right.
More people might get out and deer hunt because we're allowing crossbows to be out there. Are more deer getting killed? Maybe, but we can always change the regulations if that happens.
You can always manage it.
Yeah, instead of making the Alabama rig illegal like BASS did, that's a competitive thing. That's fine. But for the state of Oklahoma to step in and say, you can't use that, well, that's like stopping people from doing something. If the regulation's correct, we don't care if you catch your 5 bass on 1 cast or 50 cast, right?
Right.
Okay, that's my thought process with that.
As we go into that question and answers, how many times do y'all check that for your management of how much you keep? You know, this is happening now.
2
Are y'all
years,
going
3
to?
years?
Yeah.
Yeah, on our big-time reservoirs that get hit a lot, it's all a different thing. So our little city reservoirs, it might be every 5 years that we get to them and really do a good sample. Grand Lake in northeast Oklahoma, one of my lakes, it gets a sample pretty much yearly. On crappie, it's maybe every other year. It's been the last 2 years in a row, but with bass, it's yearly. You get places like Eufaula or Oologah, they're getting looked at pretty carefully. And then beyond that, there's times I get phone calls, and it's not just one. I mean, we get a lot of phone calls that say, there's no crappie anymore in this place. Well, generally, if you just get one, that means nothing. If you get 10, we better go do something.
Mm-hmm.
So we also, when we get those calls or we get those concerns, we look at it.
Mm-hmm.
We set up sometimes as much as a research project. We had one at Spavinaw Lake in eastern Oklahoma where they wanted bigger crappie, but they liked being able to take crappie home. So we did a 3-year research project and pretty much showed them, this is what you can have, but these are the choices you'll have to make. So you guys make the decision, and we'll manage it how you guys want it. And at the end of the day, they like taking home 10 to 15 9-inch crappie a day and catching a big one every now and then. And so we left it like it was.
What we had a good question from one of our friends that's a tournament angler. He's stating that if he sinks some plastic structure in clear water, that won't grow algae. If you drop wood in the clear water, it will grow algae. And then if can you explain that, the difference between wood and plastic, clear water, stained water?
Stained water and clear water is an easy one. If the light's not penetrating to where whatever you put's down there, you're not gonna have any growth of anything. So it's light penetration. Same reason that the fish aren't as deep in these places when you have turbid water. The light's not penetrating. There's no bloom of any algae. There's no oxygen because of that. Generally, there's not fresh oxygen being made through photosynthesis. There's a lot of different reasons. But that's why things in stained water are not going to grow algae on them if they're past a certain depth, because the light has to penetrate to have growth. Now, the clear water, the plastic, the wood's obviously got a lot of nutrients that it's letting go. It's breaking down. You've got all this bacteria and stuff working, and that's all growing. Plastic stuff, I don't know if it's the type of plastic you need or what, but I know this. When we put in spider blocks, we just have used those old, it's like second water pipe, black pipe,
Right.
plastic PVC of some sort, and it grows algae pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It might be might be something he's using. Because I've never seen anything, you pull some plastic out of the lake, it's got algae on it.
Yeah. Brad, you got any other questions?
No, man. I just appreciate you coming on board here with us today, and driving over and actually getting this information and some of this myths busted today, like the super spawn and all that good stuff. But I appreciate your time, Josh.
Yeah.
No, hey, thanks for having me. I love doing stuff like this, and we just anytime you guys need anything, give me a call. If you're in Oklahoma, come fish our lakes. Great crappie fishing.
All right, man. Hey, we got Josh Johnston, ladies and gentlemen. Come on board. He's a biologist. Check it out. Other than that, I'm Justin Berry.
Brad Chapel here.
Hey, we'll see y'all later. Thank you.
Bye.
About a mile from Big Muddy River, a place I'll always remember. Cabin on the lake and a fishing pole. Forever here I'll rest my soul. I can feel